Mr. Wolf, Josh Cohen, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's my sincere pleasure. Trust me. I'm gonna go right ahead and start. I'd like to begin actually an extremely cool story that I heard you give to Phil Mackey, excuse me, on a podcast
So wait,
recently.
aren't you going to ask me whether you should call me Mr. Wolf or
I
Gary?
knew you were gonna. Yeah. So,
I
uh,
want the hardball question right off the bat.
well, being the hard hitting journalist I am, I owe you that much, don't I? So, how do I address you, sir? Gary or Mr. Wolf?
Well, that is not an easy question to answer because as the Lord High, Almighty, Grand Poobah of Toontown, I am usually addressed by my subjects as your looniness. So, but in informal situations like this, let's just stick with Gary, okay?
Gary works. I was going to refer to you by Supreme Commander myself, but Gary will do. I appreciate that.
That works too. All right,
Um,
go ahead. Yeah, Phil Mackey. Let's get back to Phil.
yeah, absolutely, Phil. So you told him a really awesome story about when Steven Spielberg asked you for an autographed copy of your original book, Who Censored Roger
Yeah,
Rabbit.
that's the story that I never tell anybody, and I told Phil. He just wormed it out of me. Yeah, the movie had come out, and I was doing a lot of speaking engagements here, there, and everywhere, and one of the speaking engagements I did was at my cousin's school. She was a teacher in Chicago, and she taught third grade. So I talked to her third grade class, and they were extremely disappointed because they thought that I was going to be Roger Rabbit, not some wonky old guy with a beard. Um, so afterward, the one of her students, he was the one who did the school newspaper, came up to me and asked me if he could interview me. And I said, sure, of course. So he asked me, a bunch of questions, like third grade kind of questions. And after he had finished, he said, okay, I'm done. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I said, I went to journalism school. And let me give you something that I learned at journalism school. Whenever you're interviewing somebody, you always have to end the interview by asking them, now tell me something that you've never told anybody before in an interview.
Mm.
All right. And a lot of times people will tell you something. And he said, oh, okay. So tell me something you've never told anybody before in an interview. Well, I don't have a whole lot of things I've never talked about before, but I did have one. Um, and that was the fact that Steve Spielberg, when we were making the movie, came to me and said, Gary, I read your book when it came out, and I'd really like to have an autographed first edition. Can you give me a copy? And of course, you don't say no to Steve Spielberg.
No.
Well, what had happened when the book first came out in 1981? Um, they printed a very limited number of copies, 5,000, and I think they sent me 50 or 100. I can't remember. The book came out, and I started getting letters from fans who were saying, I read your book, and this is the most wonderful book I've ever read. It's fantasy and it's wonderful, and I really got into it, and I just love your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so tickled by that anytime anybody wrote me a letter and said, I really love your book, I would autograph a copy and send it to them. So I sent them all out. I had no copies of my own book. I did not have a copy. I didn't even have one for myself. I had no copies of my own book. So when Steve Spielberg comes to me and says, hey, I want a copy of your book, you don't say no to Steve Spielberg.
Mm-mm.
Well, you do, but you never work in Hollywood again.
Ah.
So I said, okay, Steve, I'll take care of you. So I had to go to a rare book dealer, and I had to pay $350 for a copy of my own book, right? A mint copy of my own book, which I then autographed and gave to Steve Spielberg. So I told the kid that story, and figured I'd never hear about it again. And it came out in his little mimeographed the sheet. Mimeograph is the old form of Xerox for those too young to know what a mimeograph was. But it came out and everybody in the school read it. Well, it turned out that the kid's father was a stringer for the Associated Press. And he read this thing in his kid's school paper, his kid's third grade school paper, and he wrote a story about it and put it on the wire, and it appeared in every paper in the country. So everybody in the country knew that I had given Steven Spielberg essentially a used book. Embarrassing for me, but the real heartwarming part of the story was that of the 50 books that I gave away when the book came out, that I autographed and sent to people, 39 of those people sent them back. And they all included a letter saying, we read the story about how you gave away all the copies of your book, and you should not be without a copy of your own book. Here, please take mine back.
How kind is that?
It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
I always wanted to ask you about that. Is it when you were at the Rare Bookshop, did you tell the guy there who you were?
I actually never went into the Rare Bookshop. I think I did it. This was before eBay or
Amazon.
The internet, yeah. So I think I called a Rare Bookshop in Chicago and got one from him. He could care less. He just wanted me $350. Once when I was in Paris, however, my second favorite city after Boston. Once when I was in Paris, my wife and I went to a puppet shop, and I'm a big fan of marionettes and puppets. We went into a puppet shop, which also sold movie posters, and by golly, there hanging on the wall was Who Framed Roger Rabbit in French. And I don't speak French, but I was there with my wife and a ballet dancer friend of ours who spoke fluent French. And so he said to the guy who ran the store, he pointed to my name on the poster and said, that's him. And the guy immediately took the poster down, had me sign it. I did sign it. He then put it back up and increased the price on it fivefold.
That's a smart businessman there.
Absolutely.
No, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, moving on certainly to obviously Roger Rabbit. I'm curious, how exactly did the character of Roger Rabbit pop into your head? Did he come into your head fully formed, or did you have to sort of chip away at the marble to get at the character?
Well, it a little of both. I mean, the way I came up with the entire concept of toons living in a human world, I had written three science fiction novels, and I had a contract for a fourth with Doubleday. They would let me write anything I wanted, and they would print it. So I wrote the three science fiction novels, and I wanted it for the fourth one. The first three were good, but they were science fiction. The first one was a sports science fiction thing called Killer Bowl, and second one was A Generation Removed. The third one was The Resurrectionist. All three of which are being made into movies now.
Oh wow!
For the fourth one, I wanted to do something outside the realm of traditional science fiction. I wanted to push the envelope a little bit, and I also wanted to incorporate the two great loves of my youth, my childhood, right? And those two great loves were, well, one was a triple play: cartoons, comic books, and comic strips, newspaper comic strips. That was one of my big loves when I was a kid. The other one was hard-boiled private eye novels. And I got into comic books because my mother had told me that if I wanted to, when I grew up, go on to bigger things. We lived in a very small farm town in Illinois. My father ran the pool hall, and my mother worked in the school cafeteria. My mother told me, if you want to get out of this town, you don't want to wind up running your dad's pool hall when you're grown up. The one thing you can do to make that happen is to read. Just read, read, read. That'll get you out of here. But she didn't put any restrictions on what I could read. So, I read comic books like any normal kid would.
Mm-hmm.
But also, my father read what they call true crime magazines. And I haven't browsed the magazine racks lately, but I don't think they exist anymore. In those days, there were magazines that focused on true crime. And if you ever saw the movie A Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks,
Mm-hmm.
Jude Law plays a photographer who goes around to to crime scenes, takes pictures of the crime scenes. Dead bodies were real popular. And then they do articles on them, and they publish these. Horribly graphic. And my father read them. And of course, there were a ton of them around the house, and I read them too. But my mother, again, good mother that she was, never said, "Don't read those; they'll rot your brain." So I grew up on those, and luckily I transitioned into a better grade of noir detective, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, and so my standards got a little higher. But I love cartoons, comic strips, and comic books, and noir detective fiction. So I was looking for a way to combine those two, which is not as easy as it sounds, right? So I was watching Saturday morning cartoons one Saturday morning, just purely for research. I told my wife, just purely for research. And I became fascinated not with the cartoons, because they were pretty crudely drawn in those days, as they still are. But I became fascinated with the commercials, because they had cartoon characters, Tony the Tiger, the Trix Rabbit, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, Captain Crunch, cartoon characters talking to real kids, and nobody thought that was odd. And I said, that's a great idea. What if there was a world where cartoon characters were real? What kind of a world would that be? So I spent a year just researching the things that cartoon characters, comic book characters, and comic strip characters did that humans didn't or couldn't. And I came up with what I thought was a pretty good premise. I needed a lead character, and I wanted a character that was kind of a Disney character. I had no intention at that time of ever selling this as a movie, and I had not even the wildest pipe dream that it would ever be a Disney movie. But I wanted Roger to be a kind of Disney character. I looked and I saw that they didn't really have a star rabbit character. They had a lot of minor rabbit characters, Brer Rabbit and Thumper, but they didn't really have a star like Bugs Bunny.
Sure.
I said, all right, I'm gonna make him a rabbit, because he's gonna have like a Disney sensibility, as opposed to a Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny sensibility, where Bugs will, tell you something and stick a dynamite down your pants, and Roger will tell you something and he'll Scout's honor, he'll follow through with it. So he was a kind of a Disney-esque rabbit. I made him brown in the book because I wanted to differentiate him from Bugs Bunny and every other Disney rabbit, all of whom seem to be white. And then I wanted to give him a, va-va-voom wife, which is where Jessica came from. And I based Jessica on a lot of the fantasy girls of my youth, all of whom were cartoon characters or movie stars.
Sure.
Red Hot Riding Hood, who was a Tex Avery character, who looks very similar to Jessica. If you look at the Red Hot Riding Hood comic cartoons, Swing Shift Cinderella, Wild and Wolfie, I think is one. You'll see that Red Hot is essentially Jessica Rabbit. Jessica Rabbit is essentially Red Hot. Probably my most successful character is Baby Herman, because I based Baby Herman on a lot of the adult baby characters that existed back in the 30s and 40s, and there were a lot. When I showed the book to my agent, he said, "Oh, well, you can't use this. This is not your character." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's my character. I made him up." He says, "Oh, no, I've seen this Baby Herman character before." So I fooled my own agent, but it took me a while to come up with what they wore. Roger wore coveralls, a polka dot bow tie. Jessica, the red dress, and Baby Herman, of course, a diaper with a bow in his hair. And so that was really where it came from. Now, you have to realize that I'm a writer. I'm not an artist. And so when I wrote them, I could shut my eyes and I could kind of see them. But in the book, one of the conventions that I chose to use in the book is the fact that in comic books and comic strips, cartoon characters talk with word balloons. They don't actually talk. So I decided that was a really neat convention to use for a book. So the Roger, Jessica, all of them, they can't speak if they want to, but they choose not to because it's harder. So they all speak with word balloons. So if you're talking to a cartoon character in my book, you don't listen to him, you read him. And if he turns around, his balloon turns around, and then you either turn around, go behind him, or you learn to read in reverse. And if somebody gets shot with a toon gun, it produces a bang balloon. And then you pick that bang balloon, kind of becomes brittle, like a dinner plate. And you can pick it up and you save it. And then if you find another bang balloon, you can compare the two bang balloons. And if they match, they came from the same toon gun. So I did a lot of stuff with that. As a result, in my head, I never heard them speak. I didn't know what they should sound like. So I knew what they should look like, but not what they should sound like. So that's kind of, I guess that's kind of, they didn't come to me fully formed. So I guess I did kind of have to chip away at huge mounds of solidified paint to get to them. I don't know.
No, that's fantastic, Gary. Thank you. I'd be curious to know, what exactly was it that inspired the plot of Who Censored Roger Rabbit?
Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Now, have you read the book?
I've read bits and pieces. I can't say I've read the whole thing. I'm ashamed to admit.
You should read the book. Everybody should read the book. It's one of the it's actually referred to as a cult classic novel. It's no secret that the plot of the book is different from the plot of the movie. And people have always said to me, "Well, aren't you ticked that Disney changed the plot of your book when they made the movie?" And my answer is no, because the book's a book and the movie's a movie. In a book, you rely on a reader's imagination. The reader has to bring something to the party, and the reader reads it and visualizes it in his or her own head, which is how I intended it for it to be read. When you have a movie, it's all up there on the screen. You know, very little imagination required. Somebody else's imagination put it there. So I wrote things into the book that were not filmic. You couldn't film things like word balloons.
Sure.
Right? And certain aspects of the book couldn't exist anywhere except in a world where cartoon characters are real. And that was the basis of my plot. I wanted a plot, a good, solid noir mystery plot that could only exist in a world where cartoon characters were real. And so that gave me my villain, who was different from the villain in the movie. It's a character that couldn't exist anywhere but a cartoon universe. And just like Judge Doom couldn't exist anywhere except the cartoon universe. So that's kind of carried forward. But some of the conventions I used, I didn't think could ever be made into a movie. And, when Disney said, "Hey, we want to make a movie out of your book," I said, of course, be my guest, because they paid me more money for it than everything I'd ever made writing put together. But I really did not believe that book was filmable. I didn't think that there was any way that you could take what I had written and make it into a movie. And I was kind of right, because they had to change the story. But they did not change the most important things. They didn't change the concept. Mm-hmm. It's still a world of cartoon characters living in a human world. They didn't change any of my characters. I still got Jessica, Roger Rabbit, Baby Herman, Eddie Valiant, who I named after my dad. So they kept the important things and actually made it a filmable story.
Wow, yeah. That's awesome. No, thank you, Gary. And for any aspiring writers who might listen to this, I think I want to ask you, how many times was the book rejected, Gary?
Oh, okay. So good story. Here you go. So as I told you, I had a 4-book contract with Doubleday. Mm-hmm. I gave them 3 books, and they printed them. Never a question. I gave them. So I did the 4th novel, and that was Roger Rabbit. So I sent the 4th novel to my editor, and she kept it for a while, and then she sent it back and said, "I'm sorry, Gary, I had to reject it." Mm-hmm. And this is the first reject I'd ever had. I mean, I'd written 100 short stories, 3 novels, never had a reject, never had somebody say, "No, I can't, I won't publish this," never. So I called her and I said, "Sharon, why did you reject this novel?" And she said, "Well," she said, "it's so different from anything you've ever written before, so different from anything anybody's ever written before, that I had to send it over to the marketing department. And they were the ones who rejected it." So I said, "Well, I'm going to give them a call." So I called the marketing department and talked to the head of marketing. I said, "Charlie," I said, "that Roger Rabbit book," I said, "that's the best thing I've ever written. You know that?" He said, yeah, it's really good." So why can't you publish this? And he said, "Well, it doesn't fit in any category. There's no spot for this on a bookstore shelf. It's not a regular mystery novel. It's not a regular adult novel. It's not a kid's novel. It's not really a fantasy novel. It's not a travel book. There's no category for this book on the bookstore shelf." So I said to him, "Okay, what would you do if somebody brought you The Wizard of Oz, Gulliver's Travels, mm-hmm. or Alice in Wonderland? What would you do with those?" And he thought about it for a minute. And he says, "I couldn't sell those either." So I went to my agent. I said, "Bill, what am I going to do here?" I said, if I can't publish this book, I don't want to be a writer anymore, because this is what I want to write. This is it. And if I can't write this, then I don't want to write anything. So no, don't worry about it. We'll find it home. So he started sending it out to different editors at different publishers. Sometimes different editors at the same publisher, because they all have independence and they all have a different viewpoint. And it kept coming back, always the same. The editors loved it, but they would send it to the marketing department, and the marketing department would say, "No, we can't publish this." And in those days, this was again before the internet, and when you got a reject, it came to you as a sheet of paper in an envelope in your mailbox. And my wife used to call my trip out to the mailbox every day the daily disappointments, because I would go out and come back with a fistful of reject slips. And over the space of time, the book got rejected 110 times. 110 publishers or editors said, "No, we can't publish this book." Always for the same reason. There's no category for this on the bookstore shelves. So finally, 111 the book wound up on the desk of a young woman named Rebecca Martin, and she worked for St. Martin's Press. She had just published a big bestseller for them, edited a big bestseller for them. And so the president, the publisher, gave her a vanity project. He said, all right, you can publish any book you want for your next project. You pick it and you can publish it. And just at that moment, Roger Rabbit came across her desk. Well, of course, she loved it like every other editor did. So she took it directly to the publisher. Skipped marketing, sent it directly to the publisher. Said, here's the book. Here's my vanity project. I want to publish this. So he said, all right, I'm going to read it tonight. And I'll get back to you in the morning. So he took it home, read it, came back to her the next day, said, Rebecca, I told you could publish anything you want, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it. And Rebecca stepped up to the plate and said, look, either publish it or I quit.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they published it, albeit in very small quantities, 5,000 copies, like I told you. Mm-hmm. And if I had my life to live over again, and I could go back in time and I knew what I know today, right? What I changed. Well, I would buy all 5,000 of those copies because they sold for like $2.99. And now if you look on eBay, they're going for $350, $400, right? I mean, I paid $350 for one myself. So, the book came out, and because of the movie tie-in, it got a book club edition almost immediately, but because of the movie tie-in, it went into paperback, and at last tally, I think it's in its 22nd printing in paperback now. Yeah.
Wow. That's extraordinary, Gary. No, thank you. And thank you, Rebecca, huh?
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes.
So, yes, and of course the movie, try that again. The book was adapted into a movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, released in 1988. Huge hit. I wanted to ask you, Gary, with all the changes in plot and general structure, what were your initial thoughts upon seeing the movie for the first time?
Oh, well, sure. When they started working on the movie, actually before the book came out. I got a call that I sold the rights to St. Martin's in 1980, and the book took a year to come out. It came out in 1981, which is just the lag time between buying a book and publishing a book. So in that interim, before the book had actually came out, I got a call at home. And I answered the phone, and the voice on the other end says, "Is this Gary K. Wolf?" I said, "Yes, it is." He says, "This is Roy Disney." I said, "Yeah, right. Roy Disney calling me at home." That's Joyce. Yeah, he said, "No, really, it's Roy Disney." And I'm wondering if you'd be interested in selling the Walt Disney Company the rights to your book, Who Censored Roger Rabbit, and letting us make it into a movie. Yeah, right. The book hasn't even come out yet. Well, it turned out that somebody at St. Martin's sent a copy of the manuscript to Disney, saying, "Hey, we think you'd like this." And in fact, they did like it, and it made its way up to Roy Disney. And Roy Disney says, "Yeah, let's buy this and make it into a movie." Well, as I told you, they paid me a lot of money for it, but I was never really convinced that the book was filmable. I didn't see how they could do it. And for the first couple of years, they really proved me right. I mean, they really did not, in 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, they did not have the horsepower, or they had the creativity probably, but not the technical horsepower to do it. And they kept coming up with all kinds of oddball things. They ran some tests of animation and live action together that were just horrific. Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens was the voice of Roger, and it was just horrible stuff. And then they came to me and said, "Look, we're not having any luck with this live action animation thing. What would you say if we did it with the cartoon characters in costume like they are in Disneyland?" And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going
That's
to
a
have
bust.
Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant. I'm going to have Haley Mills as Jessica, Dean Jones as the rabbit, and
Right.
Kurt Russell as Baby Herman. Don't you think that kind of compromises the premise just a little bit? And they agreed that it did. So you know, they went on trying to look at it. I didn't think it would ever get done. But in 1985, Michael Eisner came in. Roy Disney was out. And Michael brought with him Jeff Katzenberg, who he'd worked with at 20th Century. And they decided that of all the projects they had under development, the one project they wanted to keep, and the one project that had to be done was Roger Rabbit. They had to do that one. So they did something that nobody else had ever done at Disney before. They brought in an outside producer. And that outside producer was, a little known guy named Steve Spielberg, right? So still Steve Spielberg comes in and starts working on my movie. And to show you what a difference Steve Spielberg makes in Hollywood, in 1982 or 3, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers and said, hey, we're doing this live action animated movie. We'd like, all of our characters are going to be in it, all of them. And we'd like to have Bugs Bunny do a cameo. So Bugs Bunny would come on screen, he'd say, what's up, Doc? And walk off. He'd be on screen for 20 seconds. What do you say? And Warner Brothers said to Roy Disney, get lost. Get lost. There's no way
Right.
that Bugs Bunny is ever going to be in a Walt Disney movie. That is never going to happen. So 4 years later, Steve Spielberg walks into Warner Brothers and makes the identical request. Can we have Bugs Bunny for a cameo? And Warner Brothers says, of course. Of course. Well, Porky Pig, don't you want him too? Wile E. Coyote and a Roadrunner, and Yosemite Sam. Here, take them all. So that's the difference Steve Spielberg makes. Steve's biggest contribution was that he brought on Bob Zemeckis. Mm-hmm. And Bob Z had actually read the book, as had Steven, when it first came out. And Bob Z had been offered the directing job back in 1981 and had turned it down because he didn't believe that Disney had the horsepower to do it. So, he went on and did some other little-known things like Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. But
he did okay.
When Steve Spielberg got involved and asked Bob Z to come on board, he did. Mm-hmm. The next thing that Steve did was, and Bob was more involved in this. They wanted to pick a lead animator, somebody who would have control of all the animators and would have a grand vision. And everybody wanted Chuck Jones. Everybody wanted Chuck Jones, but Chuck Jones was getting up in years. And one of the few instances of in Hollywood where Hollywood people have ever shown sympathy, they were afraid that the stress of doing this movie might kill him because he was so elderly and so frail. So right. They decided not to give him the job. Then they wanted to go with Ralph Bakshi. And of course, Ralph Bakshi took one look at it and said, I can do wonderful things with Jessica. And Steven finally said no because he thought Ralph Bakshi was too much of a goon. But I've always wondered what Ralph Bakshi would have done with Jessica. Ralph Bakshi, for those who don't know, is the one who did the X-rated right? Fritz the Cat. Mm-hmm. So then they finally selected a guy, British guy, expatriate, named Richard Williams. And he had won the Academy Award for the Pink Panther, was at the time doing a series of commercials for a British beer. And if you go on YouTube and Google Richard Williams British beer, you can see his cartoons. It's a cat with 9 lives, and in every episode, he gets killed because he wants to drink a beer so bad that he does something stupid and gets killed. But if you see those, you will see that a lot of the action winds up in Roger Rabbit. A lot of those beer commercials are in Roger Rabbit. So Dick Williams was actually the one who worked with me to develop what the characters looked like. And he started with Roger. He liked the overalls. He changed them to red so they would pop. He suggested that instead of a brown rabbit, we have a white rabbit because it would pop off the screen more and also be easier to animate. So, and I didn't have a problem with that. With Jessica, he went with the Red Hot Riding Hood kind of template, but he made her even more bosomy and more wasp-waisted because he wanted this to be seen as a tour de force of animation. And there's a technique in animation called rotoscoping, where you photograph a live actor or actress, and then you kind of just draw over it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, perfectly acceptable technique. They used it in Snow White, in the dance scenes, in Cinderella, the dance scenes. It was actually, I think, Marge Champion who was doing the dance scenes in Cinderella. It's a perfectly acceptable technique, but he wanted people to know that this wasn't rotoscoped. So he gave her an impossible figure. I mean, there was no way that you could find a real woman to rotoscope that figure over. And this is also the reason in the beginning of the movie, have you seen the movie?
Oh, yeah.
All the way through. Okay. All right. The book's next. So in the beginning of the movie, when you see the cartoon, Dick Williams did that entire cartoon himself. Every cell he had it. And if you look at it, look at the floor, because the floor is black and white tile, reflective. All right. Now, there's no reason why that floor in a cartoon had to be black and white tile. Could have been gray. Could have been Battleship slate gray with no reflection. But he wanted to show that this was animation that was light years ahead of everything else. Because for every single cell, and there's 24 cells per second. For every cell, the angle changed on every single tile. And so he had to animate different angle every single tile, and then put the reflections on top of that. So, and he did it just to show that he could do it, right? And it wasn't just, I mean, the whole movie is like that. There's a scene when Roger is in the storage room at the bar, and he's sitting there on that crate, and something hits the light, and the light bulb, the light starts going back and forth, and the shadows on Roger change as the light bulb keeps going back and forth, and that's just incredible animation. And animators now refer to that level of animation as bumping the light.
Wow.
It's good. It's called bumping the light because it was such an incredible thing. So, as they were coming up with the story, as they were coming up with the characters, they had all read my book. They all liked my ideas. And I would sometimes find myself sitting in a room with 35 of the most creative people I've ever met in my life. And they were all kind of throwing out ideas on how to make my story better and how to make my ideas funnier. And, I started thinking, geez, where were you guys when I was writing this thing every morning from 5 a.m. until 7 when I had to go to work, in my kitchen or on my kitchen table. If I'd had you guys then, I would have had a Pulitzer Prize winner. But I had no problem with anything they did to the movie. It was brilliant movie. They were working on it right up until the premiere. And the premiere was at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. And so I went down from Boston to the premiere, and I had never seen the movie all the way through because they were literally still working on it. I had never seen my credit because they hadn't attached the credits to anything that I had seen. So I was at the premiere, and I was up on the first balcony with the VIPs, and I was about to see my movie for the first time all the way through. I was about to see my credit on the screen for the first time ever. And I was sitting between Kathleen Turner on the left, who was the voice of Jessica Rabbit, and Amy Irving, who was Steve's wife at the time, on my right, who was the singing voice of Jessica Rabbit. Jessica had two voices. And I'm thinking to myself, life doesn't get any better than this. And by golly, life got better because Kathleen leaned over and she put her hand on my knee and she whispered in my ear, she said, "Gary, are you excited?" And I said, "Kathleen, you have no idea."
That's awesome.
So, the movie won 4 Academy Awards. It was the top grossing movie of the year. I think at last total, it's grossed over $1 billion. Continues to be shown on the Disney Channel, Disney Plus. But I continually get fan letters. I've written 2 sequel novels, 2 Roger Rabbit sequel novels. I don't know what to tell you. I have no problem with what they did with that little book I wrote back in 1981.
That's fantastic. No, thank you, Gary. Yeah, I want to read a quick paragraph that I just pulled off the Wikipedia profile for the movie, and then I have a question for you at the end of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the original film was released through Disney's Touchstone Pictures banner on June 22nd, 1988, and became a blockbuster hit. It brought a renewed interest in the golden age of American animation, spearheading modern American animation and the Disney Renaissance. It won, to your point, 3 Academy Awards for Best Film Editing, Best Sound Effects Editing, and Best Visual Effects, and received an extremely well-deserved Special Achievement Academy Award for Richard Williams for its animation direction. And finally, in 2016, it was selected for the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, end quote. Mm-hmm. It may have been inculcated in your last answer, Gary, but I am curious to know, were you surprised at just how warmly it's been received and how it's persisted through the years?
A little bit, yeah. For a movie that I thought was not going to be possible to make, it struck a magical chord with a lot of people, and it has not died out. In fact, there seems to be more interest now than there was when it first came out, and I attribute that to a couple of things. When the movie first came out, a lot of people saw it, and the plan was to re-release it every 7 years, like Disney was doing with their movies. So every 7 years, a lot of people would see it. But Steve Spielberg, who was the producer, and who vowed that he would never release a movie of his on VHS, right? And VHS, which would include Roger Rabbit, decided to release E.T. on VHS and made a ton of money. So he said, "Well, work for
worth a shot.
We'll do Roger Rabbit too." So he released Roger Rabbit on VHS, and all of the people who saw it originally bought a copy and watched it again. And at that point, they started using it as a babysitter. They started using it to keep their kids amused while they were doing whatever. And so those kids grew up seeing it and loving it. And now those kids have got kids of their own. And now they're showing them the Blu-ray, and they're showing it to them on Disney Plus. And my fans keep getting actually older and younger. I've got fans who are, in their 70s and 80s, and I've got fans who are in their It's a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
It's incredible.
And when I go to shows and sign autographs, I get them both. And I don't see it dying out. It seems to be as popular now as it ever was. And I think one of the reasons is because it was so well made and so well thought out that it has aged well.
Sure.
You can look at it today and it's not dated. It's not trite. It's not corny. I won't tell you the movie, but it was a movie that I saw years ago, and I just adored it. I thought, geez, this is the greatest movie in the world. And it's really hard to find. It's not been released on video, but I was able to track down a copy and watch it, and I was going to kind of relive my youth.
Mm-hmm.
I watched it. It was the most horrible movie you've ever seen in your life. It was just horrible. It was two people screaming at each other for 90 minutes. Like, whoa, big whoop. But Roger Rabbit isn't like that.
Mm.
Roger Rabbit, I watch it every year just to keep my hand in and go down memory lane. I watch it, and I'm still not bored. And I still see things in it that I had forgotten or
Sure.
had noticed the first time. And I think it'll last forever. I think it'll be a classic. I think it is a classic already. Yeah.
No, without question. And one of the reasons I was so excited to speak with you and reach out to you was I was one of those kids that watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit a million times growing up. I was obsessed with that movie. That and Clue were my two top ones from my childhood.
well, all right. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to compare. It was such a superior movie to Roger Rabbit, but
Oh no, Roger Rabbit's number one for me. So yeah, Gary, what are you working on currently? My understanding is I believe you have a fourth Toontown novel that you're working on, correct?
Yeah, I actually have a new Jessica Rabbit novel. I just published a third Toontown novel, which is Who Wacked Roger Rabbit. And if anybody wants to learn more about the wondrous mind of Gary K. Wolf, you can go to my website, which is www.garywolf.com. And there you can learn all about me and my background, and you can buy my books. And I recommend that everybody buy my books. They should be on every bookshelf in the country. Yeah, I just finished a new Toontown novel starring Jessica Rabbit, and it's an origin story. It shows where Jessica came from, how she became Jessica Rabbit, how she met Roger, and basically where Toontown came from, how Toontown came to be. I got so many things. I'm working. I told you I'm working on an animated movie based on Killer Ball, and I'm working on a couple of other projects. I'm getting ready to do an anthology of Roger Rabbit short stories. Actually, not necessarily Roger Rabbit, Toontown short stories, and they will be done by A-listers. I mean, big deal, New York Times best-selling authors who are each going to do a Toontown or Roger Rabbit story.
Wow.
And these guys are so good that I don't think they're going to let me have a story in it. I keep busy. I keep busy.
That's great. Well, you have to, especially in the pandemic, right? Got to do something to.
Absolutely. Well, I just got my second COVID shot, and I got my first one. I'm a Boston boy, so I got my first one I got both of them actually at Fenway Park.
Oh, right on.
And for those baseball fans, Fenway Park is like baseball heaven. And I wanted to give a gift to whomever gave me the shot because, if I die, there's no more Roger Rabbit. So, and they're keeping me alive. They're keeping my rabbit alive. So I brought with me a copy of my book, Who Censored Roger Rabbit. And I wore my Lucky Roger Rabbit t-shirt. And so I sat down to get my first shot. The young woman who gave me the shot looked at me. She said, "That's my favorite movie." She said, "I was pregnant when I saw that movie in the theater, and I went into delivery during the credits. And so during the ending credits, so I went directly from the movie theater to the delivery room,
Wow.
and my son was born on the day that movie came out. And she said, I've still got the talking Roger Rabbit doll I bought for him when he was born. And I said, well, I got a surprise for you. I'm the creator of Roger Rabbit, and I got this book, and I signed the book to her, and
Wow.
she was over the moon. So I went to get my second shot, and I brought another book, right? And I said to the young woman who gave it to me, I said, hey, did you ever see Who Framed Roger Rabbit? She said, no. I said, do you know who Roger Rabbit is? She said, no, not really. So I four people in the world who had never seen Roger Rabbit, who had no idea who he was. I gave her the book anyway. I think she's going to sell it on eBay.
That's funny. Well, Gary, I have just a few questions left for you, and then you're no longer my prisoner. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Let's have it.
All right. Yes, sir. So I'm curious, Gary, if you weren't an author, what do you think you would be in life?
Oh, I thought about that a lot. I would do something where I work with my hands. I would probably be a woodworker because I equate writing a novel to building a table. You start out with a rough piece of wood, and you kind of plane it down until it's smoother and smoother and smoother, and then you fit it together until all the parts fit. And when it all fits together and looks pretty, then it's finished. And that's building a table, and that's writing a novel. So I would probably be a woodworker. I would probably be a restorer of antique carousel animals. That's what I would do.
Fascinating. I love it. Well, Gary Wolf, I know that you're a J School man. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. So yeah, in that vein, I'm going to do you right, and I'm going to ask you.
Wow. I think, I'm not sure that there are any stories. I don't think, actually, I'm going to have to disappoint you because I don't think, well, I'll tell you one story out of school, but, it was my first interview. I had never done a newspaper interview before, and Roger Rabbit came out. I'd done local stuff, my hometown paper and a couple of Boston things when I was doing science fiction, but I'd never done, big deal newspapers. And so this guy called me up from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I said, Philadelphia Inquirer, I said, are you the guys who write stories about Elvis? And seeing Elvis at a donut shop? And he said, no, that's the National Enquirer. I'm the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, oh, all right, I'd like to do an interview. I said, sure, go ahead. So he asked me a bunch of questions. And at the end, he said, okay. He said, I got to ask you. He says, did you make much money on this? Which is a question I get a lot. and at the time, nobody had ever asked me that. And I said, well, I'll tell you. I said, I don't know what you consider a lot of money, but, when the Brinks truck pulled up outside my house and dropped off the bags, and I looked inside, I said, wow, should I get the Maserati or should I get the Ferrari? And then I opened up another bag and I said, hell with it, one of each. And of course I was joking, which I wanted to. And the guy printed the story.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's a story I've never told anybody.
I love that.
There you go.
Oh, that's great, Gary. Thank you so much. Well, Mr. Gary K. Wolf, how can people find out about you, my friend?
Well, go to my website, www.garywolf.com, and everything you want to know is there. You can buy my books. Now, there's a new audio version of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, too, that's actually pretty good. The guy really captured the tone. It's not Charlie Fleischer, the voice of Roger, but his Roger is pretty good. And I think you'll like it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Gary, yeah, like I said, this was truly a moment for me. That really was, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was pretty much made up my childhood. So I cannot tell you how much I appreciate taking the time for me, sir. Truly.
Well, glad you asked me. Thanks for it. Thanks for it.
My pleasure, Gary. You take care, and I hope you have a great weekend, okay?
Take care.
All
Bye.
right, yes, sir. Bye.